to celebrate their friendship of these two fabulous creatures, but also our friendship and the friendship of you and PCC, and there's just so much to be grateful for. So here is here is how Thich Nhat Hanh describes their meeting. Dr. King was staying on the 11th floor. I was on the 4th floor. He invited me up for breakfast. On my way, I was detained by the press, so I arrived late. He had kept the breakfast warm for me and had waited for me. I greeted him, Dr. King, Dr. King. Dr. Hanh, he replied. We were able to continue our discussion on peace, freedom, and community, and what kind of steps America could take to end the war. And we agree that without a community, we cannot go very far. Without a happy, harmonious community, we will not be able to realize our dream. I said to him, Martin, do you know something? In Vietnam, they call you a bodhisattva, an enlightened being trying to awaken other living beings and help them move toward compassion and understanding. Then he says, I'm glad I had the chance to tell him that, because just a few months later, he was assassinated in Memphis.
Thank you, Robert. And thanks for everyone who's joined us tonight. I'm Jacob Sherman. I'm the professor and chair of the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And this is a special PCC forum for us to celebrate and to talk about and dig into the book that Robert was just reading from, Marc Andrus's extraordinary book, Brothers in the Beloved Community. I want to take a quick moment to introduce a few of us before we get going here, and also to invite anyone who's with us to keep your microphones on mute throughout this process. Before I give introductions, let me say a little bit about how we're going to do this tonight. Our plan is to have a dialogue facilitated by between Robert McDermott, Marc Andrus, and myself around this book. And we're going to sort of do that for the first 45, 55 minutes, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A afterwards. For the Q&A function, or for the Q&A portion, let me invite you to pop questions into the chat function throughout. So if there are questions that come up, please, if you want to record them, that they're in your mind, you can drop them into the chat at any point, and I'll go through and look at them after Marc, Robert, and I finish our, the first part of our dialogue together, and then we'll move into the questions period. During the question and answer time, I might ask you to repeat your question or clarify your question vocally, and then invite you to unmute yourself so that we can hear you and see you a little bit. But dropping them into the chat will make it all go much easier for us. So without further ado, let me introduce Marc and Robert. Marc is the 8th Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of California. Before he was elected to the Diocese of California, Marc served as Bishop Suffragan in the Episcopal Diocese of Alabama. Many of you here know Bishop Marc already. You've been his students, or you've known him in parishes, or through the work that Marc's done for climate advocacy and peace across the world. Marc, in addition to being bishop, was also a student in PCC here with us. It was a privilege for Robert and me to serve on Marc's dissertation committee, in which he did a lot of the work and research that eventually led to this book. And it was a thrilling time, I think, for all of us to be in dialogue and conversation as Marc was uncovering the story of the friendship between Martin Luther King Jr. and Thich Nhat Hanh, and not just uncovering the story of it that hadn't really been told to the extent that Marc's done in this book, but also uncovering some of the spiritual and global importance of that friendship, and maybe even the legacy and lineage that friendship is is continuing to bring into the world, even now, even after the death of Dr. King. Joining me in the dialogue tonight is Professor Robert McDermott. Those of you at CIS are already very familiar with Robert. Robert is President Emeritus of the California Institute of Integral Studies and currently professor in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program. Robert is a scholar of many traditions. He's one of the world's foremost experts on the life and thought of Sri Aurobindo, of Rudolf Steiner, but he's also a great scholar of American philosophy and the American, how to put it, well, in some ways, Robert's thought more deeply than almost anyone I know about some of the spiritual meaning of America and what its mission might be. And that's bound up with figures like Dr. King, and bound up, I think, also with the story that Marc's uncovering, the importance of the beloved community to these two figures, to Thich Nhat Hanh and Dr. King. And that's an impulse that I think lies deep in Robert's heart as well, and that he's carried for a very long time. So it's thrilling for me to welcome all of you here tonight for this special PCC forum, not just celebrating, but diving into this book and this story and the ongoing importance of these two figures, that one of whom, yeah, so let me stop there. Robert, did you want to add anything before we open up our conversation with Marc?
No, it's so much better than what I would have said about myself, and and a great introduction to Marc, who we know in so many ways. I mean, he is a spiritual leader. He's also an ecologist and a social justice person, and a person who believes and practices friendship. And when he was a student in PCC, people would come up to me and say, "Are you sure he's a bishop?" Yes, I'm sure he's a bishop. He just happens to be a fabulously likable, modest, and kind bishop. So, which is hard for PCC and CIS with all of its biases and preferences. So we're thrilled to have Marc as one of our alums, but also one of our friends. The three of us are quite close together in a wonderful way. So thanks, Jake, for giving us such a good start.
It's my pleasure. So Marc, did you want to add anything before Robert and I start feed you with some questions that we've prepared to get the dialogue going tonight?
Just a tiny bit. First, you didn't say, much at all about yourself, which is, typical. You're modest. Jake is an incredible scholar. I was completely blessed to be a student at the California Institute of Integral Studies and in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness department. A student, I took numbers of courses with both Jake and Robert and with their extraordinary colleagues. It is a remarkable place, and I do just want to give a great plug for it. Of all the great institutions that I might have studied at, I might have been blessed to study at if I could get into them or if I had the time or the place, none would have suited me better than the PCC department at CIIS. And to be blessed by these two really beautiful scholars and people was really wonderful. I saw Drew Dellinger. I see Drew here, who also taught me, and really was his course on cosmology and Dr. King's thought was very, very important to me. And he is a marvelous activist and advocate and a poet and really great, and he did his own dissertation and his PhD at CIIS, which is a really lovely thing. So I'm just really blessed. And Clay Carson was my third committee member, who's a history professor at Stanford, and that was an incredible blessing as well. So anyway, I am really glad to be in this conversation. Jake and Robert wrote a bunch of quite arresting questions or topics for conversation. I was captivated by all of them. So I'm really excited for us to talk. I mean, I certainly think this is a dialogue or a conversation between us because I think you both have so much to bring to this. And then the idea of widening this out to this wonderful group that has joined us online. I continue to call it a circle when we get online together, even though everything is in little boxes. I think we can feel the humanness of the circle rather than the boxes. So let's begin.
All right. Well, thanks, Mark. Robert, do you mind if I start us off?
I'd be delighted.
So I don't have a physical copy of your book yet, Mark. For those who are at home, maybe, oh, it's vanishing into your Zoom background.
This is the one. You can see this one's addressed to you, Jay.
I love it. It's really thrilling to see this being brought out by Parallax Press. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's Parallax.
And to
founded by Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really a joy to see it move from the work you did on your dissertation to its public iteration as a book now. And the story you tell is really engaging, not least because the friendship of Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King is simultaneously shot through with global and world historical importance. So it's just gripping, right? That way, just as a kind of moment of history and an encounter between two really significant figures who embody so much history, embody so much tradition, and meet one another on the global stage. That in itself is thrilling. But in addition to that, simultaneous with that, there's also this tangible, personal, even tender encounter between the two of them. So you have the biggest global stage imaginable, and you have the intimacy of actual human friendship. That's the meeting, between two persons, between two souls, and that I think that that depth, that almost sort of binocular vision of an entire globe on the one hand, and the most intimate kind of meeting you can imagine on the other. That's part of what I think makes the story you tell so compelling. And so I wanted to start by asking you, before we get into more of our conversation tonight, what drew you to these two men, right? There's a sense in reading your book, and I know this from also working with you while you were researching it. There's a deep personal connection that's not just the personal connection between Dr. King and Thich Nhat Hanh, but also there's a deep personal investment that you have, and that sort of lit up inside of you when you began to encounter these two figures. So what was it in your life that drew you from a different dissertation topic we've been talking about, and just pulled you to this with such gravity and intensity and grace?
Beautiful. It's such a great question. So I had been devoted to both of these figures separately for many, many, many years. With Thich Nhat Hanh, it began when I was a boarding school chaplain, and I bought his little book in 1991. So it was such a long time ago, 30 years ago, called Peace is Every Step. And I was so drawn to it. I had been practicing sitting meditation, Zen meditation for years, and his lucidity with the way and simplicity of speaking of interconnection and touching the ultimate and peace was just very compelling to me. And I had the chance to go. We were living outside of Washington, D.C., only about 8 miles out away from the Capitol. And I went to hear him speak in National Cathedral, and then the next year at Washington Hebrew Congregation. Both of these are really vast interior spaces. And this very small, diminutive person sat cross-legged in the front of the cathedral, and in the next year in the synagogue, and had a crowd of over 2,000 people in each case, completely spellbound for over 2 hours. And he spoke very quietly and simply. There were no theatrics or great modulations of voice, but it was so just completely compelling. And then also, when I became suffragan bishop, as you said, in Alabama, everything about being there pointed to an invitation to become more aware, more connected to racial reconciliation and the American civil rights movement historically. And that was an incredible journey, going down into Lowndes County, where a martyr, well, many people were martyred in that county. It was called Bloody Lowndes during the 50s and the 60s, because so many Black people were violently assaulted, murdered. We don't even know how many bodies, people were disappeared. It's as if we were talking about as the Sandinistas being disappeared, or indigenous people in Guatemala being disappeared. That's what happened to Black people in Lowndes County. And Jonathan Daniel had gone down as part of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and was registering voters, and gave his life saving Ruby Sales, the great civil rights activist who was a 17-year-old student. All of that just immersed me in the living and the historical civil rights movement. And the last guest I invited to speak at the pilgrimage in Alabama before we moved to California, I'd already been elected here. And John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, had accepted my invitation to come to Lowndes County for this annual pilgrimage that honored Jonathan Daniels. And we expanded the honoring from this one really fantastic young white seminarian from the Northeast to honor all the martyrs in Alabama. And Congressman Lewis came, and he's the one who told me about the beloved community. He actually used the term, and he opened me up to that. So Dr. King had become more and more of an important figure for me. Of course, he's important to all Americans all over the world, but he became somebody who was personally important to me, and his association with the beloved community. So both these figures were so important. And the intimacy that you talk about between them, once Thich Nhat Hanh said this, I believe I know Jesus and Buddha perhaps better than many people who walked the earth with them. And why? Because I visit them every day. And I realized when I read that I could say the same. I visit Jesus and Buddha every day, and I feel that I know them. But as Robert McDermott told me, as we were working on this, and I was actually trying to make the decision to move from one dissertation topic to this one, he said, Mark, these great figures have given you the story. They've given you the story. And I really felt that. And for all those years of producing this, bringing this story into a dissertation, then to a wider public, I was visiting them every day through their writings, through thinking about them. And I think, because they are great bodhisattvas, they actually, visit me, and I them.
Well, we couldn't ask for a better introduction. Thank you, Mark. It's quite compelling and inspiring for all of us. Yeah, wonderful. And I'm thinking of whether there are students listening who are trying to choose a dissertation. I hope they choose something with that kind of impact and inspiration, and not just the kind of thing you do in a library, taking quotations from one book onto your laptop. Go ahead, Jake.
Well, you know what? As long as we're talking about the beloved community, Mark, I wonder if I could get you to say a little bit more about that, because I think, I mean, the title of your book is Brothers in the Beloved Community, and I think we can understand that fraternal feeling for one another, even though reading about it is deeply inspiring in itself. But the second half of your title might need a little bit more unpacking for people who aren't familiar with that, or only know the concept by hearing it sort of here and there in snippets of King's speech. What is the beloved community?
Well, I said too much about the beloved community when I was trying to write about it. So behind me, the screensaver is Indra's net, an Australian artist picture of Indra's net. I talked about Indra's net. The great editor I worked with at Parallax said, nobody's going to be interested in Indra's net, and it's too complex. And I talked about interdependence and interpenetration, and these are really important ideas. And it was all pretty complex. And then the same editor, Jacob Sherman, said, well, John Lewis said that the beloved community is a place of peace for all people. And he said, I get that. And I thought, okay, well, that's good enough. And I think all those other things I was trying to say bring you to the place where life can be at peace. So that's the deal, is that interconnection, recognizing that we're interconnected, that has to do with mutuality and respect. So where we've been traveling in Western culture, which I've learned from both of you to a large extent for 400 plus years, has been a world of alienation and of objectification. And we needed to objectify the earth and its life and certain people so that we could use them as resources. And once we have done that, we have moved into a world that is no longer intersubjective and full of dignity, where peace can actually obtain, and into a world of suffering and conflict based on that denial of status, denial of attention, mutual attention, and love to each other. So I think that the beloved community is a place where peace can be. And I'm pretty sure that we would say that peace is a positive content, so that it's not the Greek idea of peace, which is the absence of violence. That's a good thing. But I think this peace of the beloved community would be like shalom. It would be a Jewish concept of peace, which has positive content. So it's full. And if you ask then what it's full of, you would say it's full of agape love. So that's what creates the beloved community. All those little interconnections in Indra's net are bonds of love. That's how it's connected.
I love that, because I think spending as much time here in Northern California as I have, and in the circles that I have, you hear a lot of talk about interrelationship and connection and systems theories and things of that sort. And I think there's a lot that's really powerful in that stuff. And it's good to think that way. It's better to think that way than to think in often it's better to think that way than to think in completely fragmented forms. But sometimes I think we think about interrelationship just as an end in itself, rather than seeing that interrelationship as always sort of ethically and spiritually suffused with something more, that there's,
Right.
it's not just the brute fact of a butterfly's wing flaps here and causes this effect there. It's the moral consequence of those relationships, and the spiritual invitation to make relationships of ever greater and ever deeper flourishing, that I think makes the fact of interconnection something more than just a description of the world, right? You know, that could be mapped out in some sort of Cartesian grid. Instead, it's now, I love that description of the Indra's net behind you. It's now so many nexuses of relationality, and you know, even of personhood, not confined to the human,
exactly.
but
Personhood.
of personhood writ large.
Yeah. There's three sort of categories, I think, for the world, that of an interrelated world. There's the one you just described, which is sort of neutral. Things affect other things. So that without a moral content. And then there's actually a very negative one. There's one, and you've pointed this out before, like the interconnected world isn't by definition morally better. So you could say that totalitarianism and collective power, people cottoned onto that a long time ago, that we become much stronger when we become unified. But that kind of unity always erases diversity, right? It becomes uniformity. and then you've got the beloved community, where diversity is preserved, but you're unified in love. So Thich Nhat Hanh doesn't become Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King doesn't become Thich Nhat Hanh. They maintain their individuality, but they're united in the warmth of their love.
One of the points you make repeatedly is how they bridged differences that are thought to be unbridgeable by most of the people in the communities that they represent and come from. Buddhist, Christian, Vietnamese, American, monk, married, yeah, and their whole background, a preacher and a meditator. Yeah. and then they meet, and it's as though all those differences just fall away, but they don't fall away. They're just not, right. They're not in the way.
Right. And it is incredible. And I think that is why people light up, Robert, when I tell them, you know, they say, well, what are you doing this dissertation on? Or what is this book about? And I say the friendship of Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King, and they go, you can see their faces light up. And I think that it is for that reason that you're pointing to, which is, if those people from countries at war with each other, from different races, from different lives, a monk and a married person, and from different religions, if they can be friends, well, you know, yeah, maybe these gulfs between us in the United States right now and in the world, maybe they're not as insurmountable as we thought. And I think that is the hopeful thing.
Yeah, there's another one that is also worthy to be celebrated, and that's the great, exciting, beautiful friendship of the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu.
Yes,
I mean, yes. You know, they have a book that's all about joy.
Yeah,
and those two are fabulously joyful people who they had more time together than Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh, but it's a very similar bridging.
Very similar.
Yeah. Mark, I'm glad that you included quite a lot about the suffering of the communities that they represented, Black people in America and Vietnamese people of all varieties and in Vietnam. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts about whether there's any positive role in the, or any, what is the dynamic relationship between suffering and, let's say it, evil, and the beauty of their courage and their resilience and their devotion to peace and love. And is that, I mean, you know, be nice if we could have one without the other. And I'm wondering what you think about the chances of how they play out, I guess I'm asking.
Yeah, how they play out. Well, I love seeing that Janet Chisholm is on this in this circle as well, because she's a great member of Fellowship of Reconciliation, which was the container in which Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King met each other, and is such a carries the banner of nonviolence through more than a century, and both. And so A.J. Muste, who was one of the early presidents and founders, really, of the American Fellowship of Reconciliation, he talked about what would be called, in our terminology today, satyagraha, before it was called satyagraha in the United States. So he talked about it in terms of sacrifice. And satyagraha is often translated as soul force. And I've got to say that I learned a lot more about it in this research. And it is you could say it is the redemptive role of suffering in bringing peace and bringing the beloved community. So almost every time that Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about the beloved community, he spoke about a dynamic around it. He said that nonviolence and reconciliation are the ways that you reach the beloved community. And the nonviolent part becomes the redemptive path of suffering to be something transformative for the world. And in this way, the model is, well, for Gandhi too, from whom the term comes. You know, it's a neologism for him, from him, as beloved community is from Josiah Royce. What Gandhi used as a model, one of his models is Jesus. And for Gandhi, a devout Hindu, Jesus suffered in a way that took the suffering and turned it into spiritual power, because he resolutely stayed nonviolent. He did not affirm his oppressors. He always held to his truth. And he never gave in and said, yeah, I did it, to avoid pain, or he didn't throw anybody else ahead of himself. He held the suffering. And then what Muste said is that when a person does that, and he called it sacrifice, he said it's like the power of an atomic bomb, but it's spiritual power, and it transforms the world around it. So I think this is the value of suffering. You know, suffering is not imposed by God on Jesus or on anybody else. Suffering is not the condition of life, as some people have misinterpreted Buddhism as saying. And Thich Nhat Hanh is one of the great Buddhist teachers of the 20th century who has said that. He said the Buddha did not teach that life is suffering, but rather that suffering comes into every life. And there's a big difference. He affirmed life as beautiful, and he affirms it. But what do we do with the suffering? And when we take it into ourselves and are able to hold it without turning it against somebody, turning back in violence against somebody, it becomes very, very powerful. And I think this is the usefulness of suffering. And I think this is what both these people did. I think this is what Dr. King did. I think this is what Thich Nhat Hanh has done and continues to do. And it is part of the reason they are so attractive in our world.
Yeah, great answer, Mark. Jake, do you want to go or should I go? What do you want?
Well, let me think. If you've got something geared up, go ahead. Otherwise, I can take us in a slightly.
Well, it's continuous, not the same, but related. So, Mark, as you know, we both know Josiah Royce's writing on the beloved community. And before you and I had this topic in common, I read a lot about Royce and the beloved community and thought a lot about it.
Than I have.
Sorry?
Way more than I have.
Oh, well, anyway, we both did it. But when reading your book, as I did in the last 2 days, I want to draw you out. It's not, I guess it's not a question, it's an invitation. One of the differences between reading Royce, who really thought deeply and I think beautifully, and these two figures, is that they held the suffering of their communities and the beloved community together. That is to say, it was all of a piece. And with Royce, whose son was mentally ill, and Royce had no money, and he was always overshadowed by James, and he had a hard shot, and he didn't have what these two great figures had by way of having a more integral life. He was doing philosophy, but didn't have a way, and didn't have colleagues who had a way to integrate it with sort of the tissue of pain and suffering and despair. And so, I mean, religion gets pretty well beat up in our culture, but there I think is a case where it's the religious dimension that gives these two people such sort of an integral life, that they have these. I mean, Royce knew the New Testament inside out, but he didn't have a community of who chanted with him and who prayed with him and who gave the affective dimension of the community. So one of the questions I wrote for you, I said to Jake, is poor Royce. He said, I was born in a community 5 years older than myself. And then he spent his whole life looking for community. And I'm saying to myself, but can you find that, what they found? Can you find that at Harvard? Can you find that even at Grace Cathedral, which I love? What does it take? Does it take terrible suffering, or is something else possible? It's kind of a complicated topic, but I know you know what to say.
Well, I think your compassion in looking at Josiah Royce touches me greatly, Robert. I think he was a truly brilliant, but also a loving person. When he gave the world his book, The Problem of Christianity, I think it was a gift. I think he gave the world an incredible gift. He was a visionary, and how a person has that kind of foresight is really mysterious to me. The idea that he would look at what was to come. So he writes this circle of folks. He writes this it's published in 1913, right on the eve of World War I. And the problem he's talking about, the problem of Christianity, is that Christianity has been sidelined to some extent, not nearly to the extent it has today, but it was no longer the power that it had once been. And so he was concerned that the onrush of technological innovation that he said was about to happen. So lots had already happened, right? Everything's from the steam engine forward. That was a lot, but he believed there was so much more to come. And I think he would have been both horrified and astounded by the details of what technological innovation to come would be in war, so much of it in war. And yet he was trying to create something that would give us a way to meet the challenges of today. I mean, the love that's in that, combined with his intellect, is just really quite stunning to me. And I feel for him. What you're saying, Robert, I mean, I feel like he suffered a lot, and he suffered, in tiny circles within himself, within the circle of his family and his small circle of friends. And he was a good friend, as you know. He had the capacity for friendship. Yes, he did not have these spiritual communities, the Sangha of Thich Nhat Hanh, or the Church of Martin Luther King. It's tragic. So this takes us to this really big theme of the endurance of the Bodhisattva. When the Bodhisattva vow is taken, that they would devote themselves to the liberation of all beings. I think this means that they stay with us. And they're not perfect, they're advanced, but they're still beings. And where they have suffered, St. Paul makes this extraordinary comment about Jesus, that he makes up in his own body the sufferings of Christ. What in the world could he mean by that? And I think that just as Thich Nhat Hanh believes that Martin Luther King, as a great bodhisattva, has continued to live and influence and help him, literally help him, support him, I think the same works the other direction. So that we, the living on earth who have bodies, are also able to help those who have gone before us, that there is communion. It's not a one-way street. And Charles Williams, who both of you know about, but Jacob studies a great deal in that circle. This is his belief, right? This is a feature of what he calls co-inherence. And okay.
Which is co-inherence being another way to talk about the value-laden interpersonal interrelationship of all things in that Indra's net behind you. Yeah, Mike, I wonder if when you're talking about that, I would love to sit and think with you about the reversal of the vector, the reversal of intentionality from those who've gone before to us and back from us to those who have passed. But before we could even begin to do that, I feel like we'd want to open up a little bit more about this connection between the living and the dead, which is a surprising theme throughout your work and throughout your book. I think people who hear that you're talking about the friendship of Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King Jr. probably don't immediately realize how much you're talking about that friendship as it continued after King's assassination. And that's, I think that's a whole nother level of interrelationship beyond what we often think of today, right? That interrelationships, dynamic interrelationship, giving and receiving of gifts of personal communion and friendship can extend past the threshold of death, is a thought that I think is common in lots of human history. Yes. It seems to be almost primordial with our emergence as conscious beings on this earth, right? The first marks we have of humans emerging as language and culture users are these ancient burial sites where we're burying our dead, in fetal positions with red ochre and gifts, and the sense that there's a relationship that continues there. And yet we live in a culture that almost uniquely in human history doesn't see that relationship as, or doesn't tend to see that relationship as continuing past the threshold of death in anything other than the memories we carry in our hearts. And memory is really important. But I think what you're pointing to with Thich Nhat Hanh and Dr. King is a different kind of relationship than just one that could be spoken of only in terms of memory. It seems to be a dynamic and living one.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you could say more about that.
Yeah, completely. So we do think that's true, or we say that it's true that the dead continue with us, but it's very shallow, and Thich Nhat Hanh himself says that it's hard work. to discern the presence of these luminous beings who have whose bodies are no longer contained in bodies. He says you can do it, but it takes hard work. So we have to, I've tried to ask, how did he do that? What does he mean by, what's the hard work? So we have to start looking for what's your characteristic way of being that is not bound. It's in your body, but it's not limited to your body. So what's Jake? What's the Jake who would continue to act? And as you know, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote one play. It's never been produced. I'm in the process of getting it produced. And this is a little play that he wrote in 1967. And it's in a book that's being reissued by Parallax called Love in Action. And it's mostly essays on nonviolence and activism, but it has this play in it at the beginning. And Berrigan gives an introduction to the book and to the play. It's an amazing little play. So let me just tell you what happens. These two historic events happened that year, actually, earlier that year, the spring of 1967, a young Buddhist nun burned herself to death in Vietnam, Mai. And Sister Chang Kang knew her, and Thich Nhat Hanh knew her. He was not in Vietnam at that point. And just a few months later, in the same area of Vietnam, 5 young men who were in his school for social work. So he established this incredible school to the beginnings of engaged Buddhism, to get Buddhist monks and nuns and lay people out working side by side with peasants and helping give tools for uplift in their lives. And 5 of these young men were sleeping. It was late in the evening, and they and some assassins came into their sleeping quarters and took them at gunpoint to the banks of the Saigon River and made them kneel and killed them. But they didn't kill one of them. They thought he was dead, but he survived, and he's the one who could tell the story. So that's the historic fact. But what Thich Nhat Hanh does is start a few minutes after their death. And in the play, Mai rose, the young woman, rose to the shore, and she takes the 4 young men who have been murdered into the boat with her, and they begin rowing up the river. And they're having a discussion. It's sort of a Buddhist form of no exit. If you remember Sartre's play, No Exit, where nothing really happens. It's a play of ideas, really. So they're rowing, and they're talking about what is life after death. And they start playing with their bodies. They still see each other as having bodies. They see her with a body, they see their own bodies, but then one of them suddenly turns into a 5-year-old. And then back again. And they start realizing they are no longer bound by these bodies. And that no longer being bound by the bodies, they have more ability to be of help. So you see, I argue that he is presenting them as bodhisattvas in the making. Their lives have been cut short by murder, assassination early. But they're being tutored by Mai, who has been living in this state and as a bodhisattva for a few months more, and she's taking them in. And what she says is, there's another young woman who was murdered. They're going to see her, and she's continuing to do her work of service in the village where she used to be. She's continuing to be a person of love and of service, and they will be able to do that too. So he's presenting his idea of the continuance of people who have devoted themselves to the path of love as being able to go on and continue even better. They're freer and more able to do this because they're not limited by what bodies are, which he considers bodies to be a gift. It's not that he's looking down on them. It's rather that he's saying that it's another phase of life. And yeah.
So what is it? Oh, go ahead, Robert.
I'm just right on this because you introduced Sartre's No Exit, which is such a wonderful contrast, because they're these three people locked away with competing sexual desires. And at the end, there's the opportunity to leave. But of course, as Sartre says, nobody leaves. Why? Because they are frozen in their life. There's no possibility of any bodhisattva, anybody helping anybody. It's a frozen hell.
Well, hell is other people.
Hell is a hot place, but there's absolutely nothing more will happen. You couldn't get a more dramatic contrast between one version of the afterlife and this one, that this beautiful Mai is teaching these 5 murdered young men about the possibility of service continuing because love continues. It's a gorgeous play. I'm so glad you're bringing it out. What you do with it is really quite wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Robert. I think it's a treasure. I really think it's a treasure because it points us, along with his book on death and the afterlife, No Fear, No Death. These are the two sources that I really think taught me that this is what he believes, is that King has stayed with him as a bodhisattva, helping him, helping you, helping me, and that these people are with us and able to help us.
Yeah. Jake, you should go, but then I want to come back to this theme.
I'm on the same theme also. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about, I think that the moment in the book when you present this play is really wonderful, and it helps to crystallize the friendship between Nhat Hanh and King that's ongoing. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how Thich Nhat Hanh saw that friendship going on, continuing after King's death, because he says some things that are really telling that way. And when you talk about the work of maintaining, I don't know if I can draw you out a little bit more about the work of maintaining those relationships.
He's not explicit about the work of maintaining those relationships. I think several things that we could say. So he made this important statement that I go back to so often, and it really, in 2014, Thich Nhat Hanh, talked about the reaction he had when he learned of Dr. King's assassination, how devastated he was, and how he took a deep vow to maintain the beloved community. And then he says, I've kept that vow to this day. And he says, I believe I have always felt his support. So those were really, that statement really contained the two questions that guided the research, right? Like, what does it mean? How did he keep his vow? In what way? And then how did he feel the support? Was that just by, reading? Important. Memories? Important. But maybe more, right? And so I concluded more. I think he would say that his mindfulness would be the answer to your question, because what Nhat Hanh brings to one of the things he brings to our understanding of the beloved community is, I wish there was I don't have a better word, but interpenetration. So in Indra's net, there are the cords that make the net. But at the interstices, where the cords cross, there's a jewel. And in the jewel, all the other jewels in the universe are reflected. They're inside each one. And what Thich Nhat Hanh says is that any moment in my life, in your life, I have the chance to touch the ultimate. That it's not far away. It's not far away from us. It is present. So I think that when he practices mindfulness, what does he touch when he touches the ultimate? Well, he touches those great living beings who are with him. So I think it's in his practice of mindfulness. I mentioned a whole bunch of things that he could mean, that he could legitimately point to say, these are things I have done to maintain the beloved community. Helping found the United Nations Environmental Project, his work with the boat people coming out of Vietnam, his work for peace, all these things. But I think what the world knows him for is teaching us mindfulness. And I think that is probably what is his signal contribution to maintaining the beloved community. And by so doing, he points us to the beloved community within, and that those luminous beings who continue to help us are that present to us. They're that available to me and to you, that simply by practicing mindfulness, I touch their reality and they touch me.
It reminds me of, Robert mentioned the friendship of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which I over the holiday weekend, my family and I watched the documentary that book they did together is related to. Documentary, I think it's just called, what is it called? Joy or Mission Joy. And it's just a beautiful documentary because you see them sort of in this joyous relationship with one another, laughing with each other, teasing each other, just so light. But what I took from it especially was how both of them point to that realization of joy that is the basis of their friendship, as rooted and issuing from their practice, issuing from their religious, meditative, mindful, and prayerful practice. And that's that the beloved community that I see you and Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King all calling us towards is not realized, as you said, just by the absence of peace, and the flourishing that it realizes isn't just realized when we come together and have a good time, but it's also there's a qualitative difference in the kind of life that it seems to be inviting us into, that's related to transformations in our ways of being, in our forms of consciousness, and our very perception of one another and of the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Jacob. I think Thich Nhat Hanh talks about nonviolence in the inner garden too. So even practicing nonviolence in his mindfulness. So he's very careful about what social media we should let into our lives, the violence that we regularly watch and let into our lives. He doesn't drink alcohol, and so on. He does all that, but he also says these seeds get in to our consciousness that are noxious weed seeds. And instead of rooting them up, and it's so interesting, I put it in the book, how much like one of Jesus's parables this is. He says, you don't rip them out, because then you're actually perpetuating the whole violence on the inside, if you will. Inside, outside, just a convenience. But he says, instead, take that energy to nurture the beautiful seeds that are in you. So they're there, so touching, identifying them, watering them, lavishing love on them. That's the action of his kind of mindfulness in that way. But, this circles back to this idea of a community of practice. And prayer in the Christian sense. And Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a lovely book on prayer as well. I mean, this is one of the things that I want to say about Thich Nhat Hanh. One of the things that his friend did for him, his brother, Martin Luther King, was make Christianity not a fearsome thing to Thich Nhat Hanh. And thus, I don't think there's been a Buddhist teacher of his stature who has so compassionately explored Christian theology. I'm not an expert. I don't know, but let's just say it's prominent in his life that he explores, what does Eucharist mean? What does prayer mean? What does Christmas mean? Who is Jesus? He does all this in such an appreciative way And, some people, I'm sure, would say, some theologians would say, that's not how we understand Eucharist. Come on. But it's definitely what Will Keepan, Robert's great friend, would call interspirituality. So not interfaith where we just stay in our corners and appreciate each other, work together, and so on, but inhabiting another space which doesn't abandon Buddhism, doesn't abandon Christianity, but finds another space where we can be together in that space. And he does that so well. And prayer is one of the areas that he explores.
Robert, we're going to have to wrap up the exposition point here in a moment and give a little bit of time for some questions. But I know you wanted to add something to what we've been talking about.
You could add, and I could add till midnight, and there would always be more. So I'll forego the opportunity in order to get some questions of people who've been listening with lots of eagerness to join in. So Jake, would you facilitate this?
Sure. If I could invite anyone who has a question to drop them in the chat box now. I see that there have been some going, but they're not all questions. So maybe it would help me if you could just copy any questions you've already dropped in and re-up them so that I can see them.
Jake, we'll have to decide how to handle comments. I mean, in other words, Mark can we can all read the comments after.
Yeah.
And maybe we should, just a suggestion, you might want to focus more on the questions than the comments.
That's exactly what I'm going to do. Okay. The first question I believe that we had was from Richard Jordan, from the United Nations non-governmental representatives. 20 years ago, he said, Maurice Strong, who was the Secretary General of the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, wrote an essay called Where on Earth Are We Going? And said at the deepest level, people and societies are motivated by the fundamental moral, ethical, and spiritual values in which their beliefs are rooted. Is the climate emergency a sign of a lack of essential teachings of Christianity and Buddhism, such as mindfulness, kindness, and compassion? A little bit about what we were just talking about there.
Yeah, I so appreciate you being here, Richard, in every way. I think so. It's not that those values are lacking in Christianity or Buddhism. It's our use of them, really paying attention to them and cultivating them. They're there. One of the things that the Episcopal delegation has taken to the Conference of Parties, starting in Paris, is a practice that we would enact in the public space of these conferences, where we would take a spiritual value like honesty or compassion or forgiveness, and we would explore it with a little meditation. We would sing some chants, all standing out while thousands of people are walking by us, and people would join us. And then we would ask a question: how does this value support your climate action? Very simple question, right? So you could ask that about any of your justice work, anything you do, service, justice, love. How do these values, these virtues, how do they support that? So you have to cultivate them and you bring them to mind. Yeah, so thank you, Richard.
Does anyone have any other questions you want to drop in the chat box, or you can use the raise hand function on Zoom and I should be able to see you.
If you don't know where that is, if you have a button that says reactions.
Oh yeah, it should be on the bottom of your.
Yeah, if you press that, you should see raised hand, and then we can see it. Yeah, I see Drew. Hooray!
We're glad he's here.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Bishop Marc. This is absolutely thrilling, and I've got the book right here. I can't wait. I've skimmed through it, and I'm super excited to really savor it. I will say, as a point of pride, that Mark took my course on Martin Luther King in 2015, and it was just a 1-unit course. So I just asked for a 5 to 7 page paper. Mark turned in a 15-page paper, at least. So I could tell he had a lot to say on this topic, but it turns out he had 270 worth of things to say. And it's just a tremendous contribution. What surprised you most, or was there anything unexpected, or what was the most interesting thing that you uncovered in your research for this book?
It's a great question. I want to just honor you again, Drew, for your great work, and you are a great teacher. I've talked a lot about the endurance of the bodhisattvas after the mortal life, so that's huge. But let me say that a very big surprising thing, and I'm not sure I convinced Jacob Sherman about this, but it was really arresting to me. If you do an internet search of Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King, you will get thousands of entries that say exactly the same thing. Martin Luther King nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the 1967 Nobel Peace Prize. And it doesn't go any further than that. If you go a little bit further, then they say, you'll see people write that he made it a public nomination. King made it a public nomination. And it was an open letter, and that disqualified Thich Nhat Hanh from getting the Nobel Peace Prize, because they were supposed to be private nominations. I think, and a person I respect a great deal who does climate work with me in the international scene has said this was a stupid move, just a blunder on King's part. My reading of my research led me to believe that this was an example of what King called being a gadfly and raising the tension. So this is what he did in the letter from a Birmingham jail, and he used both those terms in the letter from a Birmingham jail. And I think the letter for a Birmingham jail was an example of what he was writing to these clergymen in Birmingham, which was by putting it out as a public letter, he's putting the pressure on them. He's raising the tension. And so, if it was just a private, gentlemanly, could I say, letter between one clergy person in jail, happens to be in jail, happens to be Black, writing to these white clergymen, that would be one thing. But because he put it out there for the world to see, suddenly the spotlight is on them. And I think he did this with his Peace Prize nomination. And so he's putting the Peace Prize committee in the spotlight. We're in the middle of the Vietnam War. If they give this prize to Thich Nhat Hanh, which great world power are they going to piss off? And they didn't give a prize that year. They didn't give it to anybody else, but they didn't give it to Thich Nhat Hanh. So I think they quelled in the face of the public light, and they failed. And I think he raised the tension, and it was a nonviolent technique that he talks about using it in the letter from a Birmingham jail. So that was a big revelation to me. I've never found anybody that has made that argument. And I think it has, you can argue it.
You're raising the tension, Mark.
Yeah, I'm raising the tension.
So one follow-up question is, so you said, that's really interesting. Thank you for that response. You said people say that King made this a public letter and therefore that disqualified Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Prize. Is that true? Is that accurate? Does a public nomination disqualify you from the Nobel Prize? Did you find out whether that was true?
Yeah, that's basically true. So they are private nominations. I can tell you that I was behind a movement to nominate Nhat Hanh 2 years ago because he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, and it was entirely a private affair, right? We got a laureate to nominate him. Only certain people can make the nominations. King was able to because he was a laureate, but they are entirely secret, and they are only supposed to be revealed X number of years after. So that would have disqualified him. Yeah. I saw another hand. Was it James?
I see it.
Hi. I
Hi.
posted.
Oh, Jamie.
Oh, you
Hi.
Hello. Very lovely to see everyone. Yeah, just really beautiful talk. I look forward to getting my own copy of your book when I can. Just wondering, as you were talking, like for the everyday person that's maybe not an activist, or you know, how do we cultivate that sense of beloved community in our own lives? And I think especially for many of us emerging out of COVID, you know, this topic of how do we be good friends to each other, I think is really
That's a beautiful
relevant.
question. And we really need it right now, don't we? It's so big. Okay, well, the whole last part of the book is on how you can do that. and you know, you don't have to get the book I take some examples from different places where I've seen beloved community working, you know, and one of them is, I just think this is stunning. The Church of the Savior in Washington, D.C. has these freedom circles, and they are deliberately diverse racially, orientation, gender, economically, and they are people of faith. But you could take this a step further, right? And say, you know, it could be any faith and no faith. So truly diverse, but they come together and they use the 12-step program to free themselves from white patriarchy, from our addiction to white patriarchy. So like, this is a stunning idea. So there's one example. So you could create what I call beloved community circles. And in order to do that, you don't need many people. So Jacob said at the beginning, I think, or Robert, we're 2 or 3. When I was asking what the quorum for this group was, he said, well, you know, we're 2 or 3 are gathered together. There, Christ is in the midst of you. So it doesn't need many, but I think the intentionality for 2 things. One, to truly look for diversity. You know, to whatever that means for you. You know, wherever you are, wherever you're located, to look to extend beyond how you self-identify. And then to look for people who want to touch the ultimate in terms of love. And so a spiritual practice that you would share, I could call it prayer and have it be a Christian and do that. And you might call it mindfulness. But we could just be quiet together for, you know, a few minutes, and then we could talk about where does that love take us, and then move forward. And if we did that together once a week, I think that would be remarkable. I have not created. I was feeling kind of ashamed because I haven't created beloved community circles per se, but then I was talking to my wife Sheila, and I thought, you know, the international faith community that I work with in terms of climate justice, it is that. We are so different in terms of our religious commitments. It's Hindu, it's Buddhist, it's Christian, it's Muslim, it's Jewish. We all work together, and nobody has a creedal difference. I mean, our commitments remain there, but the work is the healing of the planet. And so I have this experience in my own life of a kind of beloved community. And the other thing I should say about that is the whole of the beloved community is present when any of the beloved community is present. So this is part of the principles of the beloved community. So if you know, reached out to a friend, one person to make friends with in this way, the whole beloved community is manifest in your effort to do that. And, you know, and Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King are telling us we can do this, you know, that this is entirely possible. That despite the fact that I might feel that someone lives in such a different social location, religious location than I do, that they have shown me that this is possible. I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Singing together is also a really good way to do this. So one of my other examples is the Taizé community in France. Are you familiar with them? So I'm wearing the little Taizé cross. It looks like a dove, but it's also, because of the wings, it's in the shape of a kind of cross. It's an so it is Christian, but it's ecumenical. So it's Protestants and Roman Catholics, and they live together. And they began just 8 people at the beginning of World War II. And they saved many, many Jewish children and adults from the Nazi collaborators. And then, you know, their life was going on. They pray together. And then this man, this composer, Jacques Berthier, came along, and he composed a body of chant for them called Taizé chant. And it's like the labyrinth. It's everywhere. Like everybody, you can find Taizé chant everywhere. And so every summer between May and October, in week-long blocks, young people from the age of like 14 to 30 come and spend a week there at Taizé. And the number in total between May and October is 50,000 a year. And they come from everywhere. And they live in peace with each other. And the heart of it is the silence they share and the singing. They come together in this big space, this church, and we sit on the floors and we sing this chant together. And you may never see these people again, but music is magical, right? And you're singing your part, like, you know, I was a tenor at that time, and I'm singing my part, and I hear somebody singing some tenor next to me, and then we part, but you know that you've been connected to that person. You can actually feel it molecularly because of the vibratory qualities of music. It happens. So I do recommend music, shared music, as and maybe dance too.
And I recommend the last chapter of Marc's book, which is about the beloved community circles. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite sure you'll be inspired to do something.
I hope so.
To enact, to carry forward. And Marc's, I think the word you use very effectively, Marc, is lineage. Yeah. You know, there is, and you've done that so well. You go from Rice to Musty to Thurman to King to Nhat Hanh to Marc Andrus. It's really quite inspiring.
Well, to all of us, because I think this is what Thich Nhat Hanh finally does, is give the beloved community to the world. Yeah. Instead of to another, you know, single great person. Like, that's wonderful.
Right.
Thank you, Robert.
We're just about at our time here, but I think we might have time. Marc, are you available to take one more question?
Yeah, of course. This is so nice to be with everybody. I must say, I saw my beloved first cousin in this group, which really makes me so happy. Yeah.
So Missy Laren wrote me directly to put a question in there. Missy, do you want to ask it yourself, or do you want me to read it out?
Thanks, Jake. I can ask it. I'm just curious if your book traces the history of Thich Nhat Hanh's participation in the environmental movement, and if so, if you'd be willing to just summarize his main contributions real quick. Sorry, it's kind
really quick. Yes, thank you so much. It does trace it. He formed a Buddhist environmental group called Dai Dong in the late 60s. And somehow from within that, I think it was a suggestion that was made to him. He made an appointment with the Secretary General of the United Nations at that time, U Thant. And he went and met with him, and he said, you, Secretary General, you need to summon the world through the means of the United Nations for a global environmental conference. And the first one took place the next year. So you could say that COP27 that just took place in Glasgow, and you know, I'm getting chills thinking about this, the Great Paris Agreement, Kyoto, Rio, all these things that Richard Jordan has taken place in, they sprang from Thich Nhat Hanh going to U Thant and saying, this is something the United Nations uniquely can do. Like nobody else can do this. And so I think that's he also, I didn't say this so much in that regard, but he also through his writing is so inspirational about the relationship to the earth. And he wrote a love letter to the earth, which is a great poem and a prayer. And he addresses the earth as a great bodhisattva. And it is a beautiful, beautiful piece of writing. And it gives you a space in which you can relate to the earth yourself in your own way. He also calls the sun a great bodhisattva. So he's stretching our minds when he does this, when he says, oh, in Vietnam, Dr. King, we call you a great bodhisattva, or when he says to a living woman, right? Not a goddess figure, but to Chung Kong, you are a great bodhisattva. So that's changing our view of what a bodhisattva is, what a woman is, what the sun is, what the earth is, what a Christian is. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Great ending, Mark.
Thank you, Missy.
I want to thank everyone for attending this tonight. I want to thank Mark for your time and for your book. Robert, thank you for your collaboration on all this. Matt Switzer, thank you for putting this together and for all the work you did to get this out there. Really appreciate it.
Robert, thank you.
This recording will be posted. So it was so fun to see everyone who is here tonight, and it'll be wonderful to see, to hear from folks who I'm sure will listen to this and benefit from it for a long time to come. It's a great book. I encourage everyone to get it from your local independent bookstore or directly order it from Parallax. Thanks, Mark. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Great to see you all. It's
Yeah.
really quite wonderful.
This is a beloved community.
Yes, very much
beloved.
so. Love to all of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Scotty.